Brandon Thurston from Wrestlenomics is up next, and we're going to follow Brandon with John Pollock from Post Wrestling.
Delivering on the returns, increasing our margins.
Ratings go down the toilet if I'm not here.
All I do is simply put the math in my favor.
We agree that Brandon and John do good work.
The reason is simple wrestling economics.
I've been told the Netflix numbers. I've been told the metrics a little bit, probably 5 different times. I still don't get it.
There were respectable wrestling journalists who needed answers.
Thank you very much, members of the media. I hope you all go to hell. How about we pop a number right here, right now?
Whole part of the show, man.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Pollock and Thurston, where there is no John Pollock today. And today, we have renamed this program Flanagan and Thurston, because I'm joined by Neal Flanagan in place for John, who is out today. Hi, Neal.
Hi, Brandon. It's a pleasure to be with you. I mean, I've been a guest on this show once before, almost exactly a year ago after All In at the bank holiday weekend in the UK. But I've never co-hosted with you before, so that's another tick off my wish list. Listeners will be very disappointed in the absence of one man on.
We'll see. This is a ratings experiment. This is a ratings experiment to see how much of a draw John Pollock is. We'll compare the data after the fact to see how this episode does without him versus with him.
Yeah. Although the one man I'm referring to is, of course, TKO's chief operating officer, Mark Shapiro. I begged John for access to his soundboard, but got a flat refusal.
I mean, it's an eat what you kill world. That's just what it is. I mean, it's an eat what you kill world.
I'm just going to play that on repeat.
Awesome. So you have access where I do not.
The marketplace is frothy.
A unified platform, more personalization, more customization.
I have access to all of it. Yes.
In all seriousness, it's great to be. It is great to be with you.
Yes, we're glad to finally co-host the program here with Neal. You were actually at Forbidden Door in London. Is that true?
It is true. Yes, and hardcore viewers of the streams of the press conferences, the one major promotion that still does press conferences, will have heard my dulcet tones asking Tony not one but two questions at the press conference. Following the show, Tony held his media press conference and addressed several topics, and among them were a couple of questions from me.
Yes. So we'll. Do you want to go over any of the notes, or should we go right to your question?
Well, maybe I'll get into with the experience of being there, and maybe compare some notes with you,
Even better idea.
Brandon. First and foremost, I'm comparing it really with the same time last year when All In was at Wembley. And the media, now I want to preface all of this by saying none of this is a complaint before anybody wants to jump in. None of this is a complaint. Wembley Stadium's media facilities are very geared toward live filing. So there's kind of a media deck right behind the sort of first bowl of fans.
Press box.
So you get, yes, a box really. You have a little screen in front of you so you can plug into the live presentation if it's a televised event into your commentary. You've got an Ethernet cable to connect your laptop to. It's great for journalists who want to file live. The O2 really isn't set up that way, and it's absolutely understandable because the O2 Arena does not have a sports team in residence. It's primarily a concert venue. So the seating is not arranged that way at all. After the bowled seating, there is a very large circumference of suites and boxes, but that's not where the media are placed. We were placed right behind production on the hard cam side. Okay. So what would ordinarily be pretty prime seats, so that's why I'm saying I'm not complaining, but really no space to work and no meaningful connectivity either. I had zero mobile signal, and you're sort of left with just the arena's Wi-Fi, which of course is being used by nearly 20,000 other people who are probably trying to connect to it. So I was very limited in what I could do live, which is an interesting perspective, because were I there wearing my hat as a fan, as an attendee wanting to enjoy the show, you could probably not ask for better seats. But in wanting to do something live, I was really restricted to having to wait for the press conference, which was why I was so keen to try and get a couple of questions in. And you asked about, going to the clip. You'll maybe hear that. But my first question was on something that I knew, or at least had a very close thought. Tony's not going to give me a meaningful statistical answer to this, which is why I couched it in kind of like a benchmark, a particular slightly more vague benchmark. Are you hitting the million mark between cable and Max? I think a non-answer, though, is an answer. And in fact, it wasn't a non-answer. It was to his credit. And I don't know.
Yeah. Why don't we listen to it, and then we'll discuss it.
Mentioned the simulcasting on HBO Max this year. And you've been asked about specificities on that before, and you've said WBD keeps some of that close to their chest. But as a benchmark, are you able to tell us, with live and same day viewers, are you hitting the million mark between cable plus Max? I understand you may or may not be able to.
I don't know. I honestly, according to a report I saw, we may be, but also I don't exactly know, because that's the most detail I've seen. All I know is that we're one of the top sports shows. I don't know what the NBA streaming viewership was in the past. I'm not sure what the March Madness streaming viewership is. I don't know the NHL streaming viewership. But I honestly can't say exactly I don't have remotely, not even 1% the amount of data I get on a TBS show. Like, I get such extent. I know every minute, every demo, how many people were watching in every age group, and from male and female.
And we know you're a stats guy, Tony. So
if they gave them to me, I'd be really breaking them down. Believe me.
Yeah.
There you go. I think that's what I believe, is that they basically aren't given any data. He almost made it sound like he gets a little bit of data. But if he gets 1%. A little bit of data, well, if he gets any data, you'd think it'd be enough to know how many viewers there are to stack on top of cable. But yet he's clearly saying that he doesn't have enough information to say whether he has a million viewers live same day.
Yeah, I mean, I have to take him at his word, and his first response when asked specifically about that million mark benchmark was, I don't know. It would be a rather bold statement if it weren't true. So, I have to take him at his word that he doesn't know. And he pointed to the report that came out at least, I think, 6 months ago at this point, that claimed that they were hitting maybe 400,000.
Right, which is
or something on Max.
Yeah,
I find that very hard to believe, particularly when we get the week-to-week Netflix numbers, just using that as a comparator, it's difficult to believe that within the US alone they could possibly be hitting that kind of number.
Right. And he did talk elsewhere. I thought it was in response to your question, but I think he definitely said this elsewhere as I was listening to the press conference this morning about this is a point that he's made in the past, that viewership is up since they've been on streaming as well as cable versus when they were on cable only. And that is in a way true, mostly. However, the cable viewership is down year over year. I did go through the work of fact checking. I've never fact checked the demo part of this claim until now, because they're they like to talk of late, in the last couple of years at least, about the 25 to 54 demo as opposed to the 18 to 49 demo. So it's a demo that's just shifted a few years older. In any case, so what I did, he's making the argument, well, he's saying that their cable viewership is up sequentially. So not year over year, but from Q4, the last year quarter that was cable only, that their viewership on cable only, because they don't know what their streaming viewership is, their viewership on cable only since the simulcast is up. And I looked at the data. Is this true? For Collision in Q1, it was down slightly. I've excluded preemptions here, but in Q2, it was up higher than either Q4 or Q1. Dynamite viewership has been up. I've got Q3 to date here. So we're now about 2/3 of the way through Q3, and viewership is slightly down for Dynamite. Viewership is significantly down, a good portion down for Collision. It's now averaging 329,000 viewers versus 394,000 viewers, which is lower than any of the trailing three quarters. But if you look at the demo is a nicer story, because you can say in Q2 was a 1.5 versus a 1.3 in Q4, but it was down Q1 to Q3 for this demo. Again, this is the 25 to 54 demo, and I'm doing national ratings for everyone who's scoring at home. A national rating, as we all remember, is the percentage of the national population in this age group that live in TV homes. So none of those Luddites who don't own TVs are included in this. And then for Dynamite, it is even quarter to date with a 2.4. There's a 2.4 in the quarter before that. It was a 2.3 in the quarter before that. And then the last quarter with cable only, it was a 2.3. So it is basically even. It is slightly up. What he is saying, if this is the fact check meter, this is mostly true, what he's saying, I guess. Although it looks like it's about to be false for Collision in Q3. But it is true for Dynamite, right? Because even in this Q3 where it's going to be down from the prior quarter, it's still going to be up from Q4, which was cable only. And they're averaging a 2.4, which is slightly up from Q4, where they did a 2.3. So Tony Khan has been fact checked. It's mostly true what he's saying.
And he is fond of specifying this 25 to 54.
That's what WBD cares about. That's what David Zaslav cares about.
That's what he says. Yeah, which of course is not how television programs are ranked. When I file ratings reports based on your data, and each week, the
my
chart
understanding
is
it basically just depends on. It depends on what the network is focused on selling, I think. So I rank everything by 18 to 49, primarily because that number one is a key important demo, and number two, that's just the data that we have a most complete picture for. We don't have a very complete long time course history of 25 to 54, so we focus more on the 18 to 49. Which maybe in the earlier days of Dynamite was a more focused on demo.
Sure.
For the network.
And I guess you can see why that demo is becoming more important. 18 to 49, I suppose, much more traditionally the key demographic, but just anecdotally, I suppose 18 to 25-year-olds are probably somewhat poorer than they used to be in terms of spending power, and therefore less attractive to advertisers. That's of course just off the top of my head, but I can see why you would want to zero in on that.
But I mean, like even the Showbuzz daily days, they were always listing 25 to 54 as well as 18 to 49. They weren't listing out subsets of 25 to 54, but it was always in there as one of the demos, which gives to me the impression that these are the demos that ads may be sold against. It may be that an advertiser wants to buy against 18 to 49 to get the younger people in there. It may be that they want 25 to 54 for some reason because they want to get the people with the most spending power in. This is just educated guessing based on what's always been out there. Okay.
The mystery to me is the secrecy of streaming numbers. I understand that it's kind of still early days for streaming versus traditional television, and they perhaps want to keep this information proprietary. But the mystery to me is where the advertisers come into this. What are they told? Because there is advertising on Peacock, there is advertising on Max. Surely their advertising partners would want to know what's the reach, here. So I guess they might know more than Tony Khan, the co-owner and president of one of their properties that they broadcast.
I think we get a lot of information from Netflix. We get information every week, and then apparently every 6 months they're going to dump a lot of information out there. And I think it's easier for Netflix to do that because they're the winners. They're, at least in paid streaming, they're the big winners. And services like Max and Disney Plus are further on down. And I think it's as long as there's not a Nielsen, as long as there's not a third party that's just generally known to measure this stuff, it's probably in those networks' interest to keep it all secret, and so that the content producers don't know what their value is, and they can't negotiate favorably for themselves. So I think it's a bad thing for AEW that they don't know. They don't properly know what they're if what Tony Khan's saying there is true, that he has, it sounds like, no idea whether there's 500,000 people watching on Max or whether there's 5,000 people watching on Max. He doesn't know what the value of his TV show is. There's a wide range of believability. It could be, almost doubling the audience. It could be, probably not, but it could be, greatly increasing the audience, or it could be only increasing the audience a little, and nobody knows. I mean, that's a huge difference in terms of what the value of their media rights should be, I would say.
Very much so, agreed. Brandon, what do you think about the difference between the touted number in attendance of 18,992 and the WrestleTix count on the day, which was, I think, 17,573 by my notes, with about 175 still available at that point. So we've got like a 1,400 difference.
They could be counting the suite. You were there in person. Were there people sitting in the suites?
There were, yes, and I was going to. This is part of my on-site reporting, as I can report. The O2 is a very large arena, as you can tell by the capacity, and above the main bowl, before you get into the very back-tiered seating, the entire circumference really is private boxes, suites, etc., and they were very well attended by my eyeballing of them, and I could certainly see easily 1,400 people in there. I don't know whether they're also counting staff, arena staff, crew, that sort of numbers as well.
They announced, what was that number again? I have it here, 18,992. WrestleTix is estimating, and WrestleTix is just an estimate, but WrestleTix estimating, what is that? More than 1,000 few hundred is the difference there. I think it's plausible that there's, between 1,000 and 2,000 people in suites. Does that sound right? You being there in person?
It does. Yeah. It seemed reasonable. Obviously, it's very difficult to do a head count from where I was sitting, but I absolutely could see that. Yeah.
I think both WWE and AEW now are quite pressured to be. I think they can say, okay, we have the number of tickets distributed here, plus let's come up with a number for the suites if they don't have it actually counted. And I think they're pressured to not go beyond that, because they know that WrestleTix is counting the dots and is doing a pretty good job of estimating how many people are at these events, or at least how many tickets have been moved for these events.
I do find it intriguing, just on a side note, that they're able. Of course, it's an underserved market, and it's a pay-per-view. So that let's stipulate those two big factors, but they're getting less than a tenth of that when they go to Moxley's hometown for a TV taping in Cleveland just a couple of weeks ago. Yeah. I think that's a very stark difference. Obviously taking into account the two big caveats that I bring to that. I think it's fair to say, and my other question to Tony was about the creative process. It's fair to say the vibes are better. That's maybe not a topic that you normally talk about on Pollock and Thurston, but the general reception, I think, for the creative product is up. That's what we hear on feedback on post wrestling. I think that's a general sentiment that you can pick up online. Is the tail going to wag though at some point? And I think, as you've pointed out on this show many times, in-person attendance is probably the key indicator of success.
It's just the cleanest one that's not distorted by new media and old media.
Yes, and so when you're getting 1,500 people or something at the music center in Cleveland, that's not good. So I guess Khan will be hoping for an uptick in the remainder of this year. He keeps talking about 2025 being possibly their best year. Not so much for in-person attendance, and one wonders how that bodes for their return to London, particularly Wembley, which holds, as we know, around 80,000 people.
We can start the
next year.
anxiety now for how many people will they manage to draw to Wembley Stadium for All In next year. And just looking at like where their attendance trends are here, we're looking at, say, Collision numbers, which are tapings that are only Collision and not Dynamite. They're averaging in this quarter so far 1,700 versus, let's say, 2,200 in the quarter before that, and Dynamite is averaging 2,700 quarter to date, and it's a pretty consistent trend of down and down and down from, really from the return to touring, but from, I would say, the middle of 2022 or so onward.
Yeah. Again, I think on the return to Wembley, if they get anything remotely close to the 2024 number, I think they would be very pleased. I cannot fathom that they'll reach the heights of that first visit to Wembley for the initial, All In Wembley, which, was set records of various kinds. But I think they did 50-something thousand last year. And, if they manage to do that again, that's going to be a success in anybody's book. Perhaps we should move on at this point, Brandon. And as a fairly new story, labour scrutiny from the International Alliance of Theatrical Stage Employees, the IATSE, developing out of Philadelphia. The Stagehands Union's local chapter, Chapter 8, has issued a statement regarding the upcoming AEW events scheduled at the 2300 Arena, also known as the ECW Arena. The statement alleges AEW and the venue are scheduling events that fall below established area standards and working conditions that the union has negotiated for similar live event production work in their jurisdiction. And they get very specific in a Facebook post about what those standards are and what crew members ought to be earning per hour. So I think they're saying they're out in force to inform the public that AEW events are failing to meet these standards that you have up on screen for our viewers. A post on X about this, and as I mentioned, they've also posted on Facebook.
Yeah, and I've been looking through they posted a lot of videos on Facebook. The local 8 has. We'll play a clip of that, and then as we were talking before we went to air here, Neal, we were hoping to get some comments from the IATSE, and we do have those, and we'll go through those after we listen to. This is a clip from one of the videos that's on their Facebook page where they're interviewing people. This looks like the day before. They're interviewing people who are union stagehands, talking about why they're upset about this event.
Why are you and your fellow stagehands out here on the picket line at the 2300 Arena against AEW?
Well, 2300 Arena is a non-union venue. It has been for a while. They've kept the unions out for a long time. AEW, though they might not typically work in non-union venues, they're doing it now. And also, being probably the biggest show to come to this venue in a long time, they have the ability to make that change. They have the ability to say, hey, we're not going to do this show with the 10 high school kids you pulled off of the park bench.
That's right.
And to go along with the high school kids comment, we got the image that the union has posted on X here is like a giant rat who's holding up a sign that says AEW does not pay area standard wages and benefits. So earlier this morning, before I had read all the information that they've got on their Facebook page, I did email the main IATSE press office, and I asked them a few questions that we do have responses to that just came in. So the first question I asked them was, is it correct that members of IATSE Local 8 will be picketing at 2300 Arena in Philadelphia outside of AEW's events this week? Will members be picketing at each event? And they have said, quote, yes, IATSE Local 8 initiated an area standards picket line on August 26th, which is yesterday, and plans to maintain picketing at all AEW events this week. So they're running 7 events, which run into September 8th. So they start tonight with Dynamite at 2300 Arena. Of course, this is the former ECW Arena. So I don't know if that really includes all the way through to September 6th, because it's more than a week span. In any case. Secondly, I asked them, what specific issues at AEW are members protesting against? I understand the post mentions wages, benefits, and job opportunities for all entertainment workers in the community. And they wrote, members of IATSE Local 8 are protesting the substandard wages, lack of benefits, and poor working conditions being offered to stagehands working the AEW event. I also asked, are there any further specifics you can provide related to what IATSE believes is unfair? Do their complaints pertain to production workers, stagehands, wrestling talent, all the above? They write, our concerns specifically pertain to stagehands. Neither the 2300 Arena nor AEW have provided documentation showing that stagehands are being paid the area standards set by IATSE Local 8, or that workers are not being misclassified as independent contractors. So that a separate issue from the talent who may be misclassified as independent contractors. It seems that there are stagehands that 2300 Arena is using, according to them, that are misclassified as independent contractors. And last, I asked them, what remedies do IATSE members wish to see put in place at AEW to address these issues? They wrote, IATSE Local 8 is prepared to bargain a one-off collective bargaining agreement for this week's AEW event. So there you have it. I'm not hopeful that there will be a one-off collective bargaining agreement between AEW and the union here.
Yes, it seems unlikely. It is interesting that it's they say it in the clip that you played. It's a non-union venue, so AEW has run this venue before.
Not for such an extended stay, though. Correct?
No, indeed, absolutely not. But it is intriguing.
I understand people are saying, "What about NXT when they have run here, but not for an extended event?" I just want to mention too before I'll let you go. Just to explain to people my loose understanding of what stagehands are, and I'm sure there's people who could explain this better than I do. But whenever a major wrestling company like WWE or AEW goes to an event, I don't think they're bringing their own stagehands. The stagehands come from somewhere, probably within from being associated with the venue, and a lot of venues do use union stagehands. So there's I think hundreds of stagehands that are used for these big events. So that's something that I think changes from venue to venue. So.
Yeah, so we're not talking about sort of the main production staff here. We're not talking about the people who run the truck and the audio boards and all of that kind of thing. We're talking about people on the ground, runners, that sort of thing, I guess. It's a fairly small venue. I wonder how many people we're really talking about. But I suppose it's whatever way you look at it, it's not a great look, I guess, for people turning up to the shows to have sort of, flyers being handed to them and a picket line there and so on. So you wonder how this came to be. Somebody, a wrestling fan perhaps within the union, noticed this and thought, okay, let's...
I could see it being, they know that 2300 uses non-union stagehands. One event is one event. When we have somebody who's doing an extended residence here, they may have just viewed that as a good target. And if you listen to more of their Facebook videos that they've got them captioned and everything, very very TikTok like. It's funny to hear them use all of AEW's happy talk about their business against them, talking about how they just signed a new great deal with WBD. Yep. They just went from whatever value to $180 million a year. They're going to be profitable this year. They've drawn record-breaking attendances. AEW can afford to do this. So using all of Tony Khan's happy talk against him to say why they should be able to afford to use union stagehands.
Yes, and also I think that in the statement on Facebook, at least, they're saying that it's not a specific unionization effort that they're engaged in. I think they said something like, I do have a note of this, "We do not seek to organize your employees, nor does this organization seek to represent them." So I guess what they're basically saying is the prevailing standards in the area where they operate are being breached in some way. So they're not saying it's illegal. They're not saying you're doing something, your employees that you grab off the street have to join our union. They're saying this is an extended residency in a theatrical venue where our members normally would work, and you're not offering them the standards that we expect. So in that sense, they have a point to make, I guess. Yeah. So be interesting to see whether or not AEW cooperates in some way to get this sort of bad look out of the way, or whether it gets much traction, really. Okay, Brandon, if we could move on, I guess, to the WWE's media deals, plural. In this past week, we've seen some big moves, of course, a series of announcements post last week's Pollock and Thurston. We had the reveal that WWE's premium live events are moving to ESPN months ahead of initial advertising. And alongside that, a new deal for Saturday night's main event struck with Peacock. So, I mean, to break it down, the ESPN era for WWE PLEs will now begin on September 20th with the WrestlePalooza event from Indianapolis. A rather big change from the previously sort of hinted at March 2026 start date. This event will stream on the new direct-to-consumer service, which launched last week. And it means that Clash in Paris this weekend will be the final main roster PLE on Peacock. Reports from Hollywood Reporter and from the Wrestling Observer indicate that WWE and Peacock brokered an early exit from their deal. WWE reportedly felt it had fulfilled its quota of required events ahead of schedule, thanks largely to adding shows like Evolution, a second night of SummerSlam, and indeed this weekend's Clash in Paris. And reports note that ESPN did not have to buy out the remainder of Peacock's contract for this. Wasn't, of course, a completely simple breakup, because as part of brokering this early exit, WWE and NBCU have struck a new deal. Peacock will become the exclusive home for 4 Saturday night its main events specials per year. The first on November 1st, and the second on December 13th, which is going to be a big one, I guess, because it will feature John Cena's last match. Also important, I guess, to note that Peacock will continue to be the home for NXT's premium live events until March of next year, and will also house the WWE Network library until the end of this year.
The end of this year, which was a surprise. I had assumed that because this deal started way back in March of 2021, that the PLEs would expire at the same time that the library does. But
yes,
well, I guess the library now it expires, with Clash of Paris. But I figured the library would coincide with the month that this deal started, but I guess not.
Does the math work out for you, Brandon? Just kind of top line, really, in this claim that because of Evolution, because of a second night of SummerSlam,
no,
because of Christian Paris that they've reached their quota?
No, I mean, I was told by someone who would know that the number of events, because SummerSlam, the notion is that because SummerSlam was a 2-day event instead of a 1-day event, because they did the Evolution show, that they had fulfilled the number of shows. I was told that's not the case, but that they did nonetheless obviously rework this deal. Whatever the case is, I think the main takeaway here is I think it's sort of being buried that Saturday Night's Main Event is no longer going to be on broadcast NBC. It's no longer going to be simulcast on Peacock and NBC. It's going to be only on Peacock. If you look at the ratings that Saturday Night's Main Event had delivered to date, and it's not like they were doing blow away great ratings. They had done between, let's say, 1.6, 1.5, almost 2 million viewers, 1.4 million viewers. They hadn't been doing huge viewership. I mean, this is on the level of what SmackDown is often doing on USA Network on cable. But this is a different night. It is Saturday, but it is NBC. Nonetheless, it's not like they were drawing big audiences here. I could see it being the case that NBC has maybe just calculated that they could do something. It's probably just a more profitable strategy to do this, which is put something else at 8 on Sundays that may be more profitable than Saturday's Main Event would be anyway. Plus, if we make this an exclusive Peacock show, we can keep those WWE fans who may be considering canceling because of the lack of PLEs on Peacock. We need to give these people content to keep them subscribed to this ever-increasing subscription price across Peacock and all of the streamers to keep WWE fans in, because they're going to need to see these big events. They're going to need to see John Cena retire at the end of the year, and to keep them on, they're going to have NXT PLEs. Who knows what's going to happen with these other pieces of content that Mark Shapiro is wheeling and dealing, including NXT PLEs, the library, for all we know, AAA, for all we know, TNA.
I think it is interesting that big number they did in July was arguably a Cena number. And, this final match, that will probably get a lot of advertising in the run up to it in December, is going to be only on Peacock and not on NBCU. And it does look as though they are, splitting things up quite carefully at NBCU between Peacock and their other properties. For example, I've heard it said many times, why is, I don't want cable, I want to cut the cord, but I have Peacock, so why can't I watch SmackDown on there? Because that's one of their properties, and clearly it's because they want to hedge their bets. They want, they want to keep properties in various spaces, and USA Network being one of them.
I think just generally in the media business, what we've seen and what wrestling has been and always has been a big component of whenever there's new developing technologies, whether that was over-the-air TV in the 50s or cable TV in the 80s or pay-per-view or the internet or now streaming, is that around the mid-2010s, everyone saw the opportunity that was in streaming. Netflix was there first. And all of the older media companies, sort of made a gold rush to invest in streaming because, they in a sense had to. They knew that younger people were not subscribing to cable, and all, whether it was NBCU, they made a rush into Peacock. Maybe they were later than they should have been. Mm-hmm. And what they're all doing, and what W Network did, was way undercharge for it to make it a more attractive product, to get you signed up, to get your habitual viewership in there, to get you addicted to the product, to get you, to get you used to paying for it every month. And then gradually, if the W Network existed today, there's no way I think that they would be charging $9.99 a month for it. But to gradually raise the price and gradually raise the price. And I think what we're seeing now is, just this is like all these big media companies are essentially, over a long indirect course of time, we're just negotiating with the consumer. Like, how much can we get you to spend now? Now we way underpriced it to gather you all in. Isn't this a great deal? And now we're slowly going to raise the price and see what's the most what's the most economically beneficial outcome? As people have mentioned, you've got to now be subscribed to how many different things, right? You've got to have cable to get USA Network. If you're an AEW fan, you've got to have cable for, well, you don't have to have cable, in fact, right? I guess you don't have to have cable at all if you're an AEW fan. You could just have Max, right? And then order the pay-per-views through some digital means. But if you want to watch all the W content, you've got to have, thank God Tubi's free. You can always watch Evolve for free, okay? But you've got to have,
thank God,
you've got to have cable for USA Network. If you don't want to use rabbit ears for CW, and I'm talking about people in the US, people in the UK and throughout most of the rest of the world, they're lucky to watch everything on Netflix. I did an interview with somebody the other day from France, and they said that not everything, or maybe nothing in France is on Netflix yet, but it's coming soon in any case. But you've got to have cable for the USA Network. Maybe you have to have cable for CW. You have to have Netflix to see Raw. You have to have, now you're going to have ESPN DTC. Yeah. If you're not in the slightly less than half of the universe that doesn't get it for free, you're going to have to spend $30 a month to get that. So I'm not really sure if pay-per-view is actually dead, as Mark Shapiro said. If you're trying, it is your pay-per-view with a bonus, some bonus ESPN content that you're getting there. Although you are getting access to all the linear channels. If you're a cord cutter and you don't subscribe to cable at all, you get access to all the ESPN channels, and that's great. But if you're, let's say, a Comcast customer, Xfinity customer, if you're a YouTube TV customer, you already get access to ESPN. But now you have to pay an extra $30 just to watch a WWE premium live event that's kind of a pay-per-view still. So it's quite a bargain. But
it does feel, this transition away from linear television to streaming, it really kind of feels like the worst possible moment to be a consumer in the market in that space, because as you mentioned, the pricing for all of these different streaming services, HBO Max, Peacock, Paramount Plus, need a cable TV package if you want to watch everything. And I do feel for WWE fans within the US, because as you mentioned, John up in Canada, me sitting here in Ireland, for WWE, I pretty much have got nice work, Brandon.
For those who may be interested in a VPN, you can always go to nordvpn.com/postwrestling, and you get a bit of a discount there.
For those who are listening, rather than them watching, Brandon has brought up the nordvpn.com/postwrestling graphic. But yes, in Europe, most of Europe at least, in Canada, I've got a one-stop shop for Raw, NXT, SmackDown, so all of their weekly programming, apart from Evolve, the PLEs, and much of, not all, the archive. Certainly the pay-per-view archive is there, all within Netflix. And as you've outlined, within the US, this fragmentation is costly, I think, for the diehard WWE fan. But I think if you're, my guess at least, if you're Mark Shapiro, if you're Nick Khan, you're happy with this on
That's just
several
what it
levels.
Is. I mean, it's an eat what you kill world.
It certainly is. Thank you, Mark. Eat what you kill, and on several levels. One being they're getting, of course, separate deals, separate revenue streams, right. But they're also closing the market for their main competitor, AEW. As you've noted, I think last week on this show, WWE is in bed with so many other providers now that it really does narrow the field for AEW when time comes for them to renegotiate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and they could defend themselves here and say, well, there's no reason why. We don't know that they have exclusivity clauses in their media rights deals with all of these companies, which, let's list them: Disney, Netflix, Tubi is a Fox property. I'm sure it's a small deal relative to these others, but it's a Fox property. Disney, Netflix, NBC Universal, CW, which is owned by Nexstar. The only ones that are really left out here are what Amazon, Apple. There's a broadcast network called Ion here in the U.S., which is owned by Scripps, and of course WBD. And actually, I mean, AEW obviously has a major deal with WBD. They have a pay-per-view deal with Amazon. So, I mean, maybe that's a sign of maybe a partner that they could negotiate with. But that is, the point is, whether or not there's exclusivity agreements that are part of the media rights agreements that WWE does have with a variety of all, nearly all of the biggest media players. I don't know. Maybe that affects your relationship if you negotiate or sign a deal with AEW because you don't want to upset your WWE partner. Now, the MLW antitrust lawsuit, which did result in a $20 million settlement with no admitted wrongdoing. I mean, the big allegation that MLW had was that Stephanie McMahon, on the eve of MLW announcing a deal with Tubi, allegedly, Stephanie McMahon went to Fox and pressured them to cancel that deal, and they did. And that is a strong antitrust allegation. Discovery was never done on to litigate that allegation. So make of that what you will. But that was a really strong allegation. Now, is AEW going to sue WWE for antitrust? I don't know, but I would be excited to cover it. And there may or not be, this is what we see publicly. We see WWE, booking shows against AEW's major shows, including pay-per-views, to strongly run head-to-head with them. Are there other things that AEW could allege that are not public? Who knows? But I think it makes for an interesting case. But I'm sure, as I said last week, I'm sure TKO is very conscious of its antitrust risk based on not only what happened with MLW and WWE, but what is also happening with UFC. So I'm sure they have calculated this, or the major executives have just said, let's go ahead anyway. But I'm sure they're highly aware of the potential antitrust risk that they may be raising here. Especially if they're
one would imagine so, and particularly I think one of the things that's been very evident lately is this relationship they have with TNA. I mean, they don't own, but they are clearly helping, in various ways.
It's just plausible enough, Whether the rumor is that Lorenzo Fertitta may be interested in buying TNA. That has not come to fruition though yet.
Yeah. And one very quick side note on all of this, Brandon. There's a very tenuous little link to WBD over here in the UK and Ireland, because TNT Sports, which is actually it's actually a 50-50 owned company between Warner's and BT, because it used to be called BT Sport. Right. They still air the UFC events, so I suppose there is even a link into WBD there, although one imagines that
clearly not strong enough to prohibit AEW from making a strong deal, which they did.
Of course, yes, and it really feels as though Paramount is looking to snap up those rights as they come due. And it's fair to say
Paramount
also,
is the other one that I left out, which UFC just made a huge deal with.
Of course, yeah, and I think it's fair to say. Not to undersell the popularity of UFC in this part of the world, but the timing of those shows. I mean, people in the Eastern time zone complain about how late they are. They are literally in the middle of the night in the UK. So, I mean, you've got to be, the main event might start at 4:30 or something like that. So I'm not sure how many live viewers they're really getting anyway. Yeah. But yes, a side note. So anything more on all of that, Brandon?
I think that's all point of view? For Media Ecosystem Corner.
Okay. Well, let's move to Legal Corner then, I guess. And this was one that you picked up on first. We'll go to, Brandon, which is Janel Grant's medical records being filed publicly, albeit briefly. Mm-hmm. This past Tuesday, not yesterday, but the week before. A significant event, really, I think, occurred in the defamation lawsuit filed by Dr. Carlon Colker against Grant's attorney, Ann Callis. This is one of several lawsuits, but that specifically as I've just mentioned, the defamation lawsuit filed by Colker against Grant's attorney. During this filing, they submitted a legal filing that contained unredacted excerpts from Janel Grant's private medical records, including her date of birth and some other documents that normally would be prohibited from view. Briefly viewable on the public court docket before the judge ordered it sealed the next morning, when the team filed a properly redacted version. You, I think, Brandon, were, if not the first, among the very first people to spot this.
Well, the way that looking at court filings works is there's a website called Pacer where you have to pay like 10 cents a page to look at court filings, and then if you have a certain Chrome extension, they get mirrored on sites like Court Listener. So I'm pretty sure I'm the one who unlocked it. And I'll say that we're not going to talk about any of the medical information itself here.
No.
But this is why laws like HIPAA exist, to protect people's very private medical information, and that's what this was. Now, things like this do happen accidentally. I tend to believe that this was done accidentally, even though we did reach out to Colker's attorneys here a number of times. I emailed them as soon as I started reading this stuff and finding that. I feel like I need to make a tree to illustrate all the lawsuits that have stemmed from the Vince scandal of 2022 and all the lawsuits and legal matters that are still going on. So this is the defamation case that Dr. Carlon Colker, who is the celebrity doctor who allegedly Vince sent Janel Grant to get treatment. She alleges that she was given medicines and IV infusions and pills that were not identified to her. Dr. Colker vehemently denies this, so much so that he is filing a defamation lawsuit against Janel Grant's attorney, Ann Callis. That's the legal matter where this happened. We're in the course of the case now where Ann Callis' side had filed a motion to dismiss, had filed these medical records under seal. So people involved in the case could see them, but the public could not. And then Colker, as is customary, filed his opposition to their motion to dismiss the case. And in that, about halfway through, embedded in the pages of their filing itself, excerpts from Grant's medical records that I think were meant to be redacted. So I emailed everybody that night and said, what's going on here? Did he have permission to do this? Colker's side never responded to me. I sent them another email, I believe the day or two after, asking them for comments, asking specifically whether it was intentional or not. And they never replied. Make of that what you will. I do know that things that are supposed to be sealed or redacted sometimes end up being uploaded to the electronic court filing system unintentionally. But it does fit into a narrative. Now, Grant's side did not comment on this either. But it does fit into a narrative, if they wanted to make it so, of this pattern of intimidation and retaliation that they say Vince and Colker have participated in. So it was ultimately, then the next morning, the judge filed a decision ordering that filing to be filed under seal. Colker refiled it, redacted, so it's now under seal. It has been, the original filing has been removed from any of the websites that I know of that would mirror this filing, so it is no longer available. Only the redacted version is.
And with, of course, as you mentioned, without getting into any of the details, is it fair to say there was substantive medical information, I mean, that you saw?
This is information that would be very easy to imagine that someone would want to keep private.
Yeah.
Yes.
I find it interesting that the Callis side, has not commented on this, because, as you mentioned, they haven't exactly been shy about making comments on intimidation tactics and so on. Perhaps, as you say, this is something that happens fairly commonly as just a simple matter of a mistake. and they didn't want to make too much of it. But
and I could see
it's concerning.
And I would add two things too: that this is a lawsuit not against Janel Grant, but against Janel Grant's attorney for things that that her attorney has said while representing Janel Grant. So I don't know how I don't know exactly how that working relationship is working between the people who represent, who do public relations work for Janel Grant, if that's extending to Ann Callis in this case. Secondly, this is a defamation lawsuit, and I would think that any further public comments that are made about this case could end up being mentioned in future filings, could end up complicating this case. But that is just my thought. Not
understood. No, that's a point. It's a point well taken. You know, because if you're trying to prove actual malice, I think which is required, I think, for defamation, you would be grabbing onto any public comment that you could, I guess, if you're the plaintiff.
And quickly about the actual malice part, it looks like Colker is setting up an argument here that he's not ready to accept that he's a public figure. Now, it's harder to prove defamation cases when you are a public figure. But he is not ready to, and there's degrees of public figure, right? Like there are limited purpose public figures. There are, the President of the United States is a general purpose public figure. But people who are lesser known, there are degrees of it. So you have to prove actual malice when it's the case of a public figure.
And he was referred to right from the beginning as a celebrity, quote, celebrity doctor, I think.
That's Grant's side saying that, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Before he was named, even, I think, in the initial filing.
Right, he was anonymized in the filing initially. As far as Dr. Colker's public profile, he's not someone whose name I recognized before he emerged in these legal matters. You can find, he's published books, he's done some appearances on television here and there. He's associated with a number of sports stars and celebrities. He does have a Wikipedia page, which I think is is kind of is suggestive of something. But he's
being a published author, I think, is also pretty significant. And I mean, same as you, I had not heard of the man beforehand, but I looked into him when his name became public, and he seems semi-prominent. In respect of what some might see as if not controversial, at least debatable points. For example, he's a fairly outspoken proponent of the use of anabolic steroids, for example, which I don't think is particularly mainstream medical view, for example.
Before we get ourselves into trouble, has he said that specifically? I've heard him talk about anabolic steroids and sort of like I've seen talking head segments where he has dissuaded younger athletes from using it, but he who knows?
Okay.
He did appear. Maybe what we're thinking of here. He did appear in Bigger, Stronger, Faster, which is a well-known documentary about PEDs.
That's what I'm thinking of. So yes, I'll revise my statement from saying a proponent of to someone who has made some commentary.
Yes.
On the matter.
His defamation lawyer, by the way, is also representing U.S. President Donald Trump in defamation cases against ABC for George Stephanopoulos' comments about Trump, and is also representing Trump in the defamation case against Wall Street Journal and other defendants related to a story that they published about Trump's alleged birthday card to Jeffrey Epstein.
Yes. Okay, Brandon, moving on, still on the legal front, some brief updates on the federal stalking case against Sean Chan, the Canadian who is accused of stalking WWE's Liv Morgan. Been a couple of new filings in this past week. August 20th, his defense counsel filed a motion to reopen his detention hearing, noting that they've secured housing for him at a Salvation Army
this is fantastic.
facility.
I brief you on any of this. This isn't published anywhere. Yes, keep going.
And then just yesterday, on August 26th, his counsel also filed a motion to continue, a motion of continuance for 2 months. The reason given was to allow a psychologist to complete an examination of Chan to determine his competency. Really, the government did not oppose this motion. And again, as a rank amateur, I think a guy who shows up at a US airport and says his residence while he's staying is going to be the WWE Performance Center, that does raise some flags as to the state of mind of this individual.
Yeah. So as you said, at the risk of just repeating what you said, because all we really know here is what's in the filings, right? Is that there was a motion to reopen his detention hearing. His public defender has said that they have found him. This is what it says. Counsel has secured housing in the district for Mr. Chan at Salvation Army. So it sounds like they found him. I think that's literally what it says. They found him housing at Salvation Army. I don't know if this is like a homeless shelter or something like that. But they are asking the court, which has not happened yet, but they're asking the court to remove him from prison and to allow him to live at the Salvation Army. And that was filed on the 20th. So that was before last week. It was on the day of last week's show here. And then just a few days ago on the 26th, so yesterday, there was this unopposed motion to continue, saying that they have a expert witness, a psychologist, who is examining him, but has not made a determination yet about whether he is competent.
Yeah.
So again, I don't know what's going to happen. He's from Canada. I don't know if he'll be deported or what will happen here.
Interesting one to keep an eye on, at least. Moving on, in the lawsuit filed by AEW commentator, previous AEW commentator Kevin Kelly and the boys, the Tate twins, against AEW, an appeal brief was filed yesterday, I believe this was, yes. Brandon, after the lower court compelled their lawsuit to arbitration. They're now appealing that decision to the US Court of Appeals 11th Circuit. I think their argument is the district court erred by not first examining their claims that the arbitration clause was unconscionable, essentially, so legally unfair and oppressive that it's not enforceable. I did read a little bit of this. It's a fairly lengthy filing. It talks about the definition of unconscionable as being, that no reasonable person, it's so unfair that no reasonable person would agree to it. I find that wording
two prongs of unconscionability: procedural and substantive. I don't remember what either one is, but continue, Neal.
And I just find that an interesting wording because, if no reasonable person would agree to it, then what does that make the people who did agree to it? But I guess that's a matter for the 11th Circuit to determine.
Right. So substantive unconscionability is when the contract's terms unfairly benefit/harm. This is according to Cornell. When the contract's terms unfairly benefit/harm one side, such as extremely unequal price compared to value exchanged. And we'll look up what procedural unconscionability is too, which is when it occurs in a contract when a contract is formed through unfair practices such as hidden terms, misleading language, or pressure to sign. Now this is relevant to the Grant case too, where the issue on the horizon in that case is also whether or not arbitration in a contract can be enforced. And I'll mention too, a few years, I think 2021, Stephen Pinu, who people may know from the Jim Cornette podcast, represented Kelly Klein. Am I getting her name right? In another case, in a case against Sinclair Broadcasting, where Sinclair Broadcasting sought to enforce the arbitration clause that was in her contract. They did not prevail. They being the Klein side, excuse me, did not prevail. And in this case, this was in district court. So there are, as I've learned through covering these things, right? There's the federal district court level, which is where you start a case, and the judge a few months ago ruled that nope, your arguments aren't strong enough here for me to not enforce arbitration here. And the judge also interpreted that. And this is how I think arbitration becomes arguably oppressive, is that this is not just that we're going to put an arbitration clause in your contract so that you can never take us to public court over anything, but we're also going to make it so that the decision about whether or not arbitration is enforceable, whether or not that can be decided by a public court, we're going to make it that only that can be decided by the arbitrator. So that you have to basically, I mean, you have to pay for a lawyer, I suppose, but in either case, but you have to go to arbitration where you have to pay money to even get that question answered. So, I think it's, it was on Busted Open Radio last week too, where Nick Nemeth was talking about, he's, sort of energetically explaining when he was presented a W contract for the first time, he had someone look it over, and according to him, the person who looked it over for him said, "Do not sign this," and his reaction was, "This is my dream job and work for WWE. There's no way I'm not signing this." So I think that's the sort of leverage situation that big wrestling companies have with wrestlers who want to be famous pro wrestlers, and they've been working at this for a very long time. And there's innumerable wrestlers who also want this opportunity. So it's, they have very little leverage to negotiate for themselves. That being said, even if arbitration is quite predatory and oppressive, and it favors the big employer because they have relationships with arbitrators, and arbitrators may have a conflict of interest in terms of wanting to maintain this working relationship with this client who has, who is setting up arbitration for them. So they may be, they may be encouraged to rule in favor of the employer and not the worker. Even that being said, just that's a legislative issue, I think, is do we want to amend the Federal Arbitration Act, which is intended to allow this to happen so that it keeps the courts, it alleviates the workload of the courts to allow there to be these sort of private mediators.
On the face of it, it really does seem to favor the employer, if you want to use that word, or the contracting body. Certainly, but as a matter of law, you do wonder if this appeal will go very far. The extract that I was mentioning a little earlier that caught my eye was as I was reading through this filing. Stephen P. New's wording is, under Florida law, a substantively unconscionable contract is one that is so unfair or unreasonable that no rational person in their right mind would agree to it, and no fair and honest person would accept it. And he cites Synergy Contracting Group Inc. versus People's Trust Insurance Company as the case for where he gets that wording from. So,
there's nothing wrong with saying that your client is unfair and dishonest if you're trying to win a judgment, I guess. Maybe there's ways to word their way out of what they seem to be saying there. But the point that I'm trying to get to is that it's exceptionally difficult. Like it's exceptionally difficult not to get a judge to not enforce arbitration.
Yes.
I have to really deceive you and trick you into signing an arbitration clause that ends up not being enforced. I have to put it in tiny print, or I have to hold you against your will. And even in those cases, there's U.S. Supreme Court precedent that really establishes that it's not just about whether I tricked you into signing the contract as a whole. I really have to deceive you when it comes to the arbitration clause itself. So even if I did something that was unfair relative to the contract as a whole, if I didn't do something different that was differently unfair, specifically unfair about how I got you to agree to the arbitration clause, that still might have to be decided by the arbitrator in terms of whether or not it can be in public court. So it is exceptionally hard, and it's a sort of a systemic advantage that employers have if you believe the notion that arbitration generally favors the employer.
Yeah. As a layman, I mean, you can absolutely see instances where a judge under their own sort of cognizance might feel this seems unfair, but I am bound by statute to simply, compel arbitration. So yes, it's certainly an interesting area of law.
And I would suggest that there isn't a lot that's novel here that's raised in this appeals filing. It's more or less that the Kelly and Tate side just wants sort of a do-over. They want the appeals court to look at this again. They're saying that, well, we didn't get to have a hearing, we didn't get to have discovery, and that would have really helped us. The district judge, the original judge, said that you needed to make an argument against the delegation clause, not just the arbitration clause, but the delegation clause. And the judge said that you didn't do that. And they say that, well, we did, because we said that every allegation that we asserted against the arbitration clause also pertained to the delegation clause. So they're going to have probably a panel. Well, if we'll see how far it gets. If it gets to a decision, they'll have a panel of appellate judges to consider this.
Interesting. It's interesting to see it go that far, to one of the great sort of circuit appeal courts of the U.S.
I was looking at, speaking of appellate courts, as everyone wants to know more, I was looking at the Brock Lesnar versus Mark Hunt lawsuit. Are you familiar with that?
Mm-hmm.
So Mark Hunt suing Brock Lesnar over the 2016 UFC 200 fight, right? Where Brock Lesnar, it came out after he gave a drug test sample, I believe, on the day of the fight that was tested after the fight happened, that was positive for clomiphene, which is a post-cycle therapy drug. And Mark Hunt was very mad about this after he found out because he lost the fight to Brock Lesnar. And so that has been through, I believe, 3 different appeals cases. It's a long story that we should not get into now, but it's just just learning how much you can appeal a judgment, and then the case then proceeds back in the original district court, and then you can appeal different judgments. So it's not as if the appeals court just inherits the whole case; they just let it proceed after their judicial review. So exciting stuff. Because Mark Hunt, the reason why I looked into this, because Mark Hunt posted a picture of himself on Twitter X with like a caption, a court filing that had the caption U.S. Supreme Court on it. So it looks like he's trying to get his case into Supreme Court now, because he has not prevailed ultimately in his case.
Which, of course, I mean,
and Zuffa.
I'm, of course, a complete layperson when it comes to law, particularly in the US. But the Supreme Court often, I note on the news, often just bats the case back to the lower court as well, with a few instructions to tell them, we're not taking this, you deal with it again. So I can see how these cases can bounce around for years. Just moving on, another legal matter, the people will remember perhaps Vince's traffic, Vince McMahon, of course, his traffic accident on July 24th, for which he was cited for reckless driving and wrecked his Bentley, which is these days subject to gigantic tariffs as a British-made car. His case has now been sealed by the Connecticut court, and the next court date being scheduled for October 16th. You noted, Brandon, I'll let you talk to this, that this is consistent with perhaps a rehabilitation program of some kind.
Yes, and before we get anybody thinking that rehabilitation in this case has nothing to do with like substance abuse or anything like that.
No.
There's a rehabilitation program that apparently is part of something that this court in Connecticut can have you do. It depends on it's different, I think, depending on what your legal issue is. Of course, Vince's legal issue here is reckless driving. So I called the court yesterday because his hearing was yesterday at 9. I called the court and they said that it had been sealed and that he just has another court date for October 16th. And if you look at it today, try to look at the case, the docket online, you see basically nothing. You get a little pop-up message that says it is statutorily sealed, which is consistent with, now we don't know that this is what happened, but it's consistent with the judge allowing something called accelerated rehabilitation, which in his case, for all we know, if this is what's happening, could just be, okay, you stay out of trouble for a while and there won't be more severe penalties here. Which is, if you don't have a criminal history, which of how far as we know, Vince was acquitted of alleged steroid distribution in 1994. He was acquitted. He was reportedly under investigation for sexual misconduct, but no charges have been brought. So I guess he doesn't have a criminal history. I don't know if he's got a history of reckless driving, but it looks like, something will happen on October 16th, and often when you're in this AR program, your case gets sealed until further decisions are made.
Yeah, and you very kindly sent me a sort of an explanatory note from the judicial branch of the state of Connecticut explaining what this program is. It does say that if there are any victims of the crime with which the defendant is charged, the court will require the defendant to send the victims a certain court form that tells them that the defendant is applying for this program. So one would wonder if the woman who was rear-ended in all of this, has
there were no injuries reported. We don't know that there were any
true.
injuries, so I don't know that the other people in the accident would be considered victims in this case, since we do not know of any injuries.
We don't actually know if this is the program that's being followed, indeed, but it does say that the conditions may include things like doing community service, paying restitution. That's the one that leapt out to me. Paying restitution, and there's some other things like counselling or animal cruelty prevention. I suppose it depends on what the crime was or alleged crime in the first place. But paying restitution is the one that leapt out to me. Paying perhaps for that median. To be repaired.
It was damaged. Yes. Community service, I would be interested to see what community service, if Vince ever does any community service.
Absolutely. Okay, I think that closes Legal Corner for the week, Brandon. So some final notes, I guess. Some new WWE dates, and some notes for NXT. They've announced Homecoming. They're returning to their old stomping ground of Full Sail University on September 16th. No Mercy in Fort Lauderdale, September 27th. Halloween Havoc, Prescott Valley, Arizona. That's on October the 25th. And for the main roster, SmackDown and a Saturday night's main event will both take place in Salt Lake City on Halloween, October 31st, and November 1st, respectively. Moving on from that, Brandon, I believe you wanted to clarify some matters to do with the chart on Japanese wrestling attendance. Unless there was anything else on the WWE.
We mentioned that AEW is going to be. This is quick, but we mentioned that AEW is going to Australia, correct?
Oh, that's correct. Yes.
So last week I showed an incorrect chart that did not completely account for the timeline that I said it accounted for. So here is the correct information with a 365-day period running from August 23rd, 2024 to August 22nd, 2025. That is roughly almost the last 365 days. So just looking at what was the looking at attendance for Japanese wrestling companies within a certain criteria. So we have a somewhat similar picture as I posted originally, but with correct numbers. The previous numbers I was mistakenly only looking at like the last 4 months of 2024. So this is the actual 365-day picture according to the data that I could scrape from Cage Match, and we end up with, in terms of total attendance, New Japan is number 1, Stardom is number 2. I believe Dragon Gate had been number 1 in the erroneous data I showed last time. Dragon Gate is number 3. Dragon Gate is helped by the fact that it runs a lot of shows, and in fact it runs more shows than anybody over this period, which is normal for Dragon Gate. They're very, very high volume. In terms of average attendance, we did not include DET here just because it didn't meet my requirement of having more than 50% of your events having attendance data with them. But average attendance, of course, New Japan is by far number 1. But after that, All Japan. After that, something called Kyushu Pro Wrestling, which always takes me aback when I find these, but they're always there. Followed by Stardom with just over 700, followed by Noah, followed by Oz Academy with its only 23 events, Dragon Gate, and it goes on from there.
I know that some of these outfits haven't run that many events, but it's interesting to me that, you get down to GLEAT or Tokyo Joshi Pro.
Or Hot Shushu.
A Hot Shushu, yeah, that's a new one on me. But, of that sort of, say, top 10, 11, I've heard of most of them, but there are ones above, the likes of Tokyo Joshi Pro, like Osaka Pro Wrestling, that, I'm really not that familiar with, and Kyushu as well. But again, if they're only running 51 events, you can see why they don't really figure in our post-wrestling news too often.
Right. Their average is relatively high. Their total would be lower. So this Kyushu would still end up being 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7th, which is above Big Japan, above Tokyo Joshi Pro, above GLEAT, above Oz Academy. But yeah.
And just to rewind slightly, because I'm not sure I really did go into the AEW events, they've expanded their 2026 tour. They already had announced with, I believe it is Grand Slam in Sydney and something called House Rules in Brisbane.
Yes, so probably a house show, untelevised. They announced they're going to do Grand Slam, which would be, they did a Grand Slam at around the same time this year, right? Where they did essentially a collision in was it in Perth? Where was AEW in Australia this year?
I think it was in Brisbane, at the Brisbane Entertainment Centre or something, which I believe is probably where they're going. Yes, they're going back to for this House Rules.
So they're doing the televised event on Saturday in Sydney at the Kudos Bank Arena with a Q, and then they're going to do a AEW House Rules, which is code for house show, I think, the next night on Sunday in Brisbane, not Brisbane.
Yeah, correct. Okay, Brandon. So that leaves us with a look at the TV ratings and streaming, of course, as well. Last Friday's taped edition of SmackDown from Dublin averaged 1,235,000 viewers, which is among the lowest in the show's history. However, its 0.35 rating in the 18 to 49 demo was identical to the previous week, and it did rank first on cable. So, interesting story to be told there, where it's number one for the night on cable, but pretty much a historic low.
Yes. I'm scrambling to look. There was NFL preseason competition. Was there strong competition on network TV? There was NFL preseason on CBS. There was traditional network fare. There was volleyball on Fox. There was NASCAR on CW, but not like NASCAR's on CW is doing huge ratings. So yeah, a pretty low number for SmackDown. Not this past Friday, but 2 Fridays ago, right? Or no, this was this past Friday. Yes, it was this past Friday. Yeah. Okay.
So I suppose we're doing these out of order, really. If I probably should go back to Raw in that case, really. Which registered.
We're used to Raw being now. I hope everyone is used to Raw being a week delayed because of the Netflix phenomenon.
Yes, Netflix reports for the entire week, doesn't it? So therefore, Raw being on Monday, you will get that data toward the end of the week. And what is it? 2.8 million global views.
2.8 million global views through 7 days. Number 7 for the week globally. It was number 5 in the U.S. This was, if we look back, this was the same number that they did the week before for August 11th. They're coming off of this post SummerSlam number where they did 3 million. So they're doing a little bit higher than they had been doing throughout earlier parts of the summer here. Yes. To briefly follow up on. We had discussed last week the Raw Netflix data controversy. I did look at. A subscriber did send me a link to a website where one can find the durations, let's say, of all of the live Raws, and I did plug that in, and I'm still so. It turns out that Raw is not the same length every week. Would you say that is accurate as someone who watches Raw?
It's roughly 2.5 hours, but it certainly changes.
But it varies. It varies. Sometimes a little more, sometimes a little less. Suffice to say for now, I cannot make the math work simply with the assumptions that the final cut duration that they list in the Tutum chart is one duration, and then the other duration is what it is, what it appears to have been live. I still cannot make that math work. It raises the question whether there has been a change in how they measure it. Now, does that mean that I believe that Raw is being watched by fewer people in the U.S. than Dynamite? No. But it raises the question about how they're blending this calculation. Now everyone understands what I meant.
It's very difficult to find out, Brandon, because as someone who watches it live on occasion, if I'm maybe filling in on Rewind or Raw, the commercial breaks are kind of, at least where I live, they're removed as you go. So if you watch the show with a half-hour delay or something like that, the commercial breaks are gone. So you don't know how long they really are. They're generally 3.5 minutes, but that's not a guarantee.
What I saw on the video that I was looking at is that they fade to black and then they unfade, and you're just watching the same match.
That's correct. Yeah. They come back with commentary in the international market. So, but this is not a very Pollock and Thurston topic to say, but you don't miss much, folks in the States. It's generally the folks in the ring taking a little bit of a break, I think, during the commercials. But I can see how that makes things very difficult, because the runtime live changes even as you're watching it and on a delay, never mind the next day whenever some of that stuff is removed.
Right. The impression that I got is that there are essentially there are something like 4 durations, but we can only really make this math work if we can get a duration that is shorter than the duration that they list in the Tudum chart. But presumably that's a duration that removes all the commercial breaks. So I don't know how you would get a duration that is actually shorter than that duration. It raises questions.
It does. It's interesting. But I do, as not someone who's particularly, like I didn't study mathematics or stats very far in my education, but I certainly think that your methodology for the, getting a sense of the United States figure certainly makes sense to me, as a good indicator.
And to say what that is, the where I think the U.S. viewership is, it's slightly down from prior year on USA Network live same day. That's just based on the number that they did disclose for the debut episode, and just extrapolating that it has declined to the same degree globally as it has US.
Yeah, and we live in hope that someday they'll do what they did for the debut episode for all of their streaming. But I wouldn't hold my breath for that. Collision, Brandon, the go home show before Forbidden Door saw a very kind of mixed result. The key demo up 17% to 0.07. I understand that jump sounds probably very good, but we're into rounding errors at this point, I guess. 0.07, but I know a total viewership falling to 281,000. Lowest in nearly 6 months. Don't know really what to make of it. Collision never does as well as Dynamite, and I don't think it ever will, at that sort of time slot on a Saturday night. But across the AEW programming, we've seen just some very interesting spikes and drops. I feel like Dynamite probably more so than Collision, where we got quite the dip last week compared with 2 pretty solid weeks of beating the 700,000 mark on Dynamite and getting close to what they did for the Mexico show, which was sort of the high water mark of this year, and then this past Wednesday, in the week running up to a pay-per-view, right down to 511 or something like that. So it's really difficult to kind of put logic on this. You could if there's a big NFL game that night, you can go, okay, that accounts for it. On cable, there was a first-run episode of South Park, which is certainly getting an awful lot of press, But they did well against a first run South Park 2 weeks previous to that, when they were hitting around 700,000. So
on
again,
this past Saturday, there was this is what topped the charts is NASCAR had the Coke Zero 400. That beat out NFL preseason on NFL Network. There's also college football on Fox. There was college football on CBS. There was a substantial amount, let alone Life, Liberty, and Levin, and my view with Laura Trump sweeping Fox News. But there was a substantial amount of competition if you wanted to look at the competition as a reason for the number being down. But Collision overall has been averaging a lower ratings, as we've seen at the beginning of this program, where we were going through the sequential comparison, where Collision has been weakening in this quarter.
Absolutely. And I think, Brandon, unless you've anything else, we've covered all of the main topics that we had on the docket for today.
We've done it. I think we've completed this. Now we can plug. You should go to postwrestlingcafe.com and support Post Wrestling if you're not already. Or you can go to patreon.com/Wrestlenomics, or you can go to Wrestlenomics.substack.com to subscribe to get all of the ratings information and other wrestling business information that I publish.
Absolutely. And I highly recommend the spreadsheet tier.
Oh, yes.
Brandon, I think you've probably spotted me in there on occasion.
Oh, I see everybody go in and out of there. Unfortunately, there's no way to turn that off. I would keep privacy if there was some way that I could, but I see everybody lurking in there because I often have it open.
Yes, occasionally when the ratings come out and I want to write up a story about it, I'll go into the spreadsheet to sort of look for some benchmarks, some recent benchmarks of highs and lows, and I can tell that Mr. Thurston's in there as well, and he can probably spot my little avatar.
Yes.
But yes, patreon.com/Wrestlenomics. It's a wonderful thing to be a patron of, as I can attest.
Yes.
Thank you very much for having me in place of John this week, Brandon. I hope I did okay.
Yes, you did a great job. We're glad to have you. I don't know what John's doing, if he's going to Canada's Wonderland again, but we'll catch up with him again next week. And this is the part of the show where I outro us out. And thanks everybody for listening. We'll talk to you again on Wednesday at 1 p.m. Eastern.